The low thrum of the helicopter's rotors was a familiar comfort, a vibration that settled deep in the bones of the 12 men strapped into the jump seats. They were a unit, a brotherhood forged in the fires of countless clandestine operations. Known only by their reputation, they were the elite of the elite, and tonight's insertion into the hostile, mountainous region was just another page in their classified history. They moved with the silent, predatory grace of men who belonged to the shadows. Each man was a master of his own domain within the team: breaching, communications, heavy weapons, demolition. They were a collection of lethal, specialized parts that formed one perfect, unstoppable machine. Their new medic, a wiry woman named Kai, sat quietly among them, a stark contrast to the hulking frames of the operators. She was a ghost, a recent transfer whose personnel file was so heavily redacted it looked like a puzzle box. The team leader, a man named Jackson who went by Jax, had simply told them, "She's our new doc. She keeps us alive." That's all you need to know. The SEALs, men who trusted their lives to each other without question, were inherently suspicious of anyone new, especially someone who didn't fit their established mold. They watched her with guarded eyes, their conversations continuing around her as if she were part of the aircraft's equipment. Kai, for her part, seemed oblivious to their skepticism. She was all business, meticulously checking her medical pack for the 10th time. Her movements were efficient, economical, born of deep-seated habit. She had a quiet intensity about her, a stillness that was more unsettling than the boisterous confidence of the men around her. They were loud, their humor dark, and their camaraderie a tangible shield against the horrors of their job. Kai was the silence that filled the spaces between their words. The insertion point was a moonless ridge, the helicopter hovering just long enough for the team to fast rope down into the inky blackness. They moved out immediately, a single, fluid entity melting into the rocky terrain. Their objective was a high-value target in a compound nestled in a valley below. The first few clicks were uneventful, the only sounds the soft crush of boots on stone and the whispered night wind. Then, chaos erupted. It wasn't a planned ambush, but a chance encounter with a heavily armed patrol. The night exploded into a cacophony of sound and muzzle flash. The SEALs reacted with terrifying speed, their training taking over. Jax's voice was a calm, steady anchor in their earpieces, directing fire, issuing orders. The firefight was fierce and violent, a desperate, close-quarters brawl in the dark. In the initial volley, a burst of automatic fire caught one of the youngest team members, a boisterous operator named Miller, square in the chest. His plate carrier stopped the rounds, but the impact spun him, and a second burst shredded his exposed leg below the knee. He went down hard, a scream tearing from his throat before he clamped his jaw shut, the pain a white-hot fire in his veins. Man down. Miller's hit. The call went out, chilling and immediate. Jax didn't hesitate. Covering fire. Doc, move. The others laid down a withering wall of lead, pushing the attackers back. Into this storm of bullets, Kai moved. She didn't crouch and crawl. She ran, a low, sprinting dash that was impossibly fast and sure-footed. She slid into the dirt next to Miller, her hands already on him, her eyes assessing the wound in a split second. A tourniquet was on his leg and tightened before the man could draw another breath. She spoke to him, her voice low and firm, a stark contrast to the thunderous chaos around her. "Miller, look at me. You're good. You're fine. Stay with me." As she worked, a round zipped past her head, so close she felt the wind of its passage. She didn't flinch. She didn't even pause. She just continued her work, injecting a dose of morphine, checking his other vitals, her hands a blur of practiced motion. To the SEALs providing cover, it was like watching a ghost work. She was utterly, completely focused, an island of calm in a sea of violence. The firefight ended as abruptly as it began. The remaining attackers melted back into the night, either dead or retreating. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and blood. The team regrouped, their breath ragged, their adrenaline pumping. They looked at Kai, who was now stabilizing Miller's leg for the exfil. Their eyes, once full of suspicion, now held a new, sharp-edged respect. She had just done something extraordinary under fire, and she'd done it without a single word of complaint or hesitation. The extraction was a blur. Miller was loaded onto the helicopter, his face pale, but his eyes grateful as they found Kai's. She gave him a single, curt nod and turned away, already repacking her gear. The flight back was silent, but the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of exclusion, but one of dawning realization. They had seen a sliver of her capability, but the question that burned in all their minds was, where did she come from? The mystery deepened over the following weeks. Kai remained the same quiet, efficient presence in their midst. She trained with them, keeping up with their punishing runs and ruck marches with a deceptive ease that suggested a level of fitness they hadn't anticipated. In medical drills, she was a savant, her knowledge of trauma medicine far exceeding what was typical for a standard corpsman. She could intubate a man in seconds, start AN4 in a pitching boat, and diagnose internal injuries with an uncanny accuracy. The men, tough and hardened as they were, began to warm to her. They'd offer her a seat at their table during chow, include her in their darkly humorous banter. She would accept the seat, but rarely contribute to the banter. She'd listen, a faint, almost sad smile on her lips, as if she were an anthropologist studying a foreign culture she once knew intimately. Her eyes, dark and deep, held a story they couldn't read. She was one of them in capability, but she remained apart. A closed book they were desperate to open. One evening, back in the relative safety of their forward operating base, the team was gathered in their common room. The air was thick with the smell of instant coffee and the sound of their raucous laughter as they rehashed a training exercise from that afternoon. The topic, as it often did, turned to past missions, to the good old days and the legendary exploits of various team members. Marcus, the team's massive heavy weapons guy, was in the middle of a story about a particularly hairy extraction in a place he couldn't name. And then, he boomed, slapping his knee. The doc we had back then. O.L. Sully. He gets his medical bag shot right off his back. Just shredded. And he just looks at it, shrugs, and pulls out this field dressing he had stuffed in his pants. Said he always kept a spare for emergencies. The room erupted in laughter. Jax, leaning back in his chair, chuckled and shook his head. Docs, men, they're a different breed. Crazy sons of guns. You gotta have a special kind of nerve to run towards the bullets instead of away from them. Becker, the communications expert, a man with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue, looked over at Kai, who was sitting slightly apart, cleaning a piece of her medical equipment with focused attention. Hey, Doc, he called out, a playful challenge in his voice. You ever run towards bullets before you ended up with us? He meant it as a joke, a way to finally pull her into their circle of shared experience. The laughter died down as the others looked at her, curious. Kai didn't look up from her work. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft click of a clasp closing. When she finally spoke, her voice was so low they had to lean in to hear. Yes, she said, simply. Just one word. Then she stood up, placed the clean equipment in her bag, and walked out of the room, leaving a stunned and intrigued silence in her wake. Her one-word answer was a pebble dropped into a still pond. The ripples of curiosity that had been gently lapping at the edges of their consciousness now became a tidal wave. Who was this woman? What had she done? The question became a quiet obsession among the team. They were men of action, trained to assess and understand threats and allies alike. Not knowing something about one of their own was an itch they couldn't scratch. Jax, ever the pragmatist, finally decided to do something about it. He had the clearance, after all. Late one night, after everyone else had turned in, he accessed the secure personnel files. He pulled up Kai's record. The first page was standard stuff: name, rank, service number. He scrolled down. The next page was almost completely black, a solid block of redacted text. Only a few words peeked through the heavy black lines. Operation ... deployment to ... Distinguished Service Cross ... Jax's eyes widened. The Distinguished Service Cross was the second highest military award, given for extraordinary heroism. He scrolled further. More black lines. Then, a single, unredacted line near the bottom. Previous assignment: Defense Intelligence Agency, Special Operations Group. Jax sat back in his chair, the truth finally dawning on him. They didn't just have a medic. They had a legend living among them, a woman whose past was so sensitive, had been erased from her own record. He closed the file, a new and profound respect settling in his gut. He wouldn't tell the others. It was her story to tell, not his. The opportunity for that story to be told came sooner than anyone expected. 2 weeks later, the team was inserted for their primary mission, the capture of the high-value target. The compound was larger and more fortified than intelligence had suggested. They breached the outer wall with controlled explosions and moved in, a wave of lethal precision.